Hello there and welcome everyone to the latest edition of our weekly. Ralph was talking about his appearance just now. Didn't say anything about the T-shirt, but I don't know if there's any explanation you'd like to give.
Well, yes. Before we go into this, I just wish to apologize for my hairstyle. I don't know whether I told you guys. I've had a knee operation. I probably didn't mention this because I don't want to actually bore people with my self-pity. So let me just talk about this for the next half hour.
Excellent, brilliant.
Well, anyway, the reason is that I've been on crutches. I couldn't get to a hairstyle place, whatever, and so that's why I look like this. But nice. Next time I come on.
Doesn't explain the T-shirt though. What's going on there?
Right. No.
Is that lack of laundry or?
Do you want to speak about something else? Please?
No. Okay. No. Fair enough.
Okay. Fair enough. This is a cool T-shirt.
It is. No, it's lovely. It's lovely. It brings out your pecs and the colour of your eyes. There you go. Right. So anyway, job done. Everything smoothed over. So anyway, right. This has been. I mean, when I say eventful week, that really is doing it a disservice. So, we are going to talk. I know that every media outlet is talking about the death of the Queen. We are not disrespecting that. Of course, it is very sad. However, we are in this podcast. We are going to talk about four things. We're going to talk about Brussels. We're going to talk about, but this isn't a tourist blog, by the way. We're going to talk about some stuff there. So we're going to talk about Brussels. We're going to talk about Porsche. We're going to talk about Liz Truss and her initial action on energy. And we're also going to talk about JP Morgan and London. So anyway, let's starting off with the Brussels thing. I noted there was a very interesting a development this week whereby it looks like Brussels is trying to give itself more sweeping power over corporates in the event of a crisis. Now, this means that they want to give themselves the power to essentially tell companies what they can produce and who they can produce it for. Now, I wonder whether this was in response to what happened with the pandemic, because remember, again, it does seem like a long time ago, but remember that there was this massive kerfuffle caused by the fact that there were vaccines that were being produced in Europe that were being sent to the UK, and there was not really much that the Europeans could do about it. But I think that if this does go, I don't know all the details of this, but from what it sounds, it does sound like they are trying to put through something that is, it goes to the heart of law, really, into whether this kind of thing should be and would be possible. But what do you think about it, Ralph?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, may I congratulate you on the use of the word kerfuffle.
Oh, yes, it's a great word, isn't it? It's a great word.
People should use it more. But yes, I also, when I saw that, I was immediately unhappy with this. It makes you uncomfortable, this sort of news. But I also don't know that much about it. I mean, this is news which is sort of currently breaking. And we will need to see exactly what the terms and conditions of this proposal is. The first thing which I would like to say is, unless I misunderstand these things, it is not as if Brussels can give itself any power. That just doesn't happen. What they do is they would formulate certain policies, and these policies then would need to be implemented, ratified into domestic law by the membership countries. And this can take a long time. Maybe it will be quicker, who knows? But it is not as if Brussels can just simply decree, we do this, and therefore all our member states are now beholden to this particular policy. It's a supranational state. It is not a federal state. So it is not as if the institutions of Brussels have any standalone power. They derive their power from the member states, and therefore everything that is being formulated as the various policy decisions or policy proposals has to be implemented into domestic law. So that's the first sort of line of defense, so to speak. But of course, that doesn't make it any less worrying what we hear there. I mean, it's looking to me, it's starting to look as if this is something like an emergency policy or emergency powers, which Brussels wish to have, which should give itself, in inverted commas, given the definition and the qualifications that are just made. And what makes me uncomfortable is that it might be a sign of the times, in terms of that the invasion of Russia and the various economic and political crises which go with that is indeed starting to perhaps hollow out the rule of law which we have in the free world, now specifically in the European Union. Now, I wouldn't overcook this, but I also am left with a feeling of discomfort in this. I'm going to have to watch this news and see where it goes. I think in the end it's not going to be anything as drastic as that, but whichever powers a central government has over the businesses which act in its environment, in its domicile, are always to be looked at with a degree of skepticism. I mean, in the end, we all do business in a regulated space and in the rule of law. The question will be how much of that is an inappropriate limitation of the entrepreneurship of these businesses. And so, yes, I come away with the net sentiment which I have from this news is still discomfort, and yes, we will have to see how this develops.
I think that my first thought, when I saw this, was the acronym WTF came to mind.
I don't know what that means. Can you?
It means, well, that's fantastic.
Fair enough.
Get out, right?
Okay,
Good get out, right?
Fine,
yeah.
fine.
It's not actually that, but yeah.
Moving on.
Anyway, so yeah, so I do think I think it's interesting from quite a scary point of view. If it goes the way I think they want it to go, they will obviously couch it in terms of, well, we want to be able to have it in the locker to be able to use it. But then after that, there are problems of what constitutes an emergency or a crisis, and then things like who judges whether that is a crisis and things like that, you know. So and there are degrees of it. Is it one of those things that comes in? It's either in or it's not, or are there degrees of it? So it's like, you know, it's a very difficult thing. But the cynical side of me says that, you know, are they trying to put this forward now while just everyone's being distracted by energy crisis, Ukraine war, etc., to try and put something through like this, because it might have more traction, or it may have less dissent than possibly if everything was on an even keel and we were in normal circumstances. But I don't know.
Well, I have to say on that subject, I'm less worried about it because if that was to be the case, then you would need to assume that the EU had wanted to do this type of thing anyway, and is currently interpreting the political crises we're all facing as an opportunity to put through a ruling, it's not a ruling, a platform which will afford it higher powers. And I don't think the EU works like this. It's not it's a supranational government. It's not even a government. It's a supranational state, as I said. So it doesn't have any ruling which is independent of the member states, any power which is independent of the member states. So I'm not cynical in that way, but I'm sort of coming at the same feeling of discomfort which you have, almost from the other side. I mean, this particular crisis we're now facing may lead to a less may lead to the implementation of more emergency powers in all of our domestic governments than we should be comfortable with.
Indeed. So, I mean, I think this is obviously one to follow, definitely one not to sweep under the carpet, because this is very important, I think. But anyway, so let's move on to the next thing, which I thought was an interesting story this week. It's been something that everyone's been expecting to happen anyway, but Volkswagen owns Porsche. And it announced this week that it wanted, it would like to do an IPO of Porsche probably by the end of this month, and it's going round investors to find out what kind of what the demand might be, etc. It looks like they're seeking out a valuation of maybe 85 billion euros, which sounds quite a lot of money. They're wanting to emulate the success of, say, Ferrari when that was spun off from Fiat. And so I think, everyone can understand the rationale for doing an IPO. What maybe is less understandable is, why does it want to do one now when the world seems like it's on the edge of a global recession? So just in the first few days, it seems that there's been criticism because it's a high valuation. They're only selling something like 12.5%, or that's what they've said so far, of the shares. So it's only very small. And then the third thing is that these shares will not come with voting rights. So even though you buy into it, you'll have absolutely zero say over what happens. So will it go ahead? I mean, I personally think that they want to get it going now because they think that the markets are going to tank. And as a result, they will be able to get a high valuation now. And if things go badly for the share price, they can blame it on external factors like geopolitical tensions, global recession, etc., etc. So that's what I think. But what do you have to say on that, Ralph?
Well, it's always a question mark why companies want to do an IPO or a partial IPO at any given time. I mean, well, I was about to say normally, but normally is even wrong. But sometimes what the intention is that, let's say you own a business like Porsche. VW owns Porsche. Porsche is not listed in itself. And so they might feel that the valuation of Porsche contained within VW is undervalued, that the business of Porsche is just undervalued. And so in bringing it to the markets, you will let the markets decide, and then you get a higher valuation on the business, and that of course translates into a higher valuation of the group, in this case VW. So that is normally why, now I said normally because it is typically the reason why companies would do such a thing. But if this was the motivation behind it, then it is unclear to me at least why they would choose a time which is sort of just before we might get a global recession. So in other words, yes, you might be right in saying, well, if they would want to actually address the valuation deficit now, then you would have to do it now, because why would you wait until there is a global recession? But that's not how equity markets work. That's not how company valuations work. The stockbroking analysts who work for the investment banks on the ticket here, they would, of course, need to factor this into their earnings projections. And if you were to reasonably expect a global recession to happen within the next several years, then that would have to be baked into the valuation. So again, it's unclear to me why they would choose this timing if that was their prime objective. So there's one other reason why companies might wish to do this, and this is if they're planning an acquisition. If I'm planning an acquisition, then obviously I need to find the money somewhere. And usually what companies do is they have a funding mix. Some of it is cash, some of it might be fresh debt, and some of it might be an equity raise. Now, if the target in question might be, in the opinion of the management of VW, difficult to get away in terms of market skepticism. So if they were to say we wish to buy company X and the analysts say, oh, this is a terrible idea, then obviously that would limit the potential of VW to raise money or to fund that particular acquisition. So it is at least conceivable that in this situation they might, well, it's almost like swap one part of their business for the intended target they're going to buy. So that would then mean that if they float 12.5% of Porsche, hoping to get as good a valuation for this business as possible. So, and
right. We understand.
Yeah, and then they would take that the revenues from that partial IPO and put it into the funding mix for an intended acquisition. Now that may make a lot more sense to me, because you might say, well, the acquisition is all of this is still now before a global recession, but that, the perhaps diminished valuation which you get for the part of the business you're selling, well, that is also true for the price of the company you're buying. We would need to, there are lots of ifs here. If this is true, if that was the situation behind the scenes, then we would need to see exactly what the target was and whether that target price would be deflated, just as the IPO sales price might be deflated because of the economic environment we're in. But that's the other sort of conspiracy theory which I might offer, and we have to see where this goes. You never know anything. Even when I was an analyst, I was unable to understand. You don't have any information here beyond what is publicly available, beyond what we're reading in the press. So I'm just saying that is, in general, another possible reason for companies to float part of their business.
I always sort of refer back to, for instance, Deliveroo, right? Because I remember when Deliveroo did their IPO. Before that, I said, at the time, I said that I think that Deliveroo need this IPO, because if they, again, I've said this like I'm saying now, I said if they wait for 6 months, their valuation is going to go right down, because people are going to, takeaways are going to, people are going to order fewer takeaways, and the Deliveroo did go for the IPO. They did get a high valuation, although it was lower than they expected. I think it was at the bottom of the range, and lo and behold, it's had an absolute nightmare performance. People have given it the nickname Flopperoo because it's gone down so much. And although there's all this bad press, I'm thinking that Will Shu, founder or co-founder, and the advisors are laughing, because they got that high valuation. They got the deal away. In a way, I almost wonder whether would they be better off maybe making more of it available to retail investors, because I would imagine retail investors are going to absolutely lap this up, because all they're going to see is, oh, Porsche, oh yeah, great. Look at what happens to Ferrari, brilliant. We'll do that.
Yep.
I think that maybe that they'll do that, because they've got a few of these. I forgot what the technical phrase is, but they, sometimes with IPOs you'll get like, actually quite a lot of the time you do get a few investors who are they will are they pillar, I don't know if it's pillar, but basically where they'll say, yes, we will take this percentage at pretty much whatever price, so that they're going to be there, and then the rest of it you don't know, people may or may not buy it, but there are a few big investors who've said that they committed, they are already interested. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's that's one way I'd look at it, is maybe it's a bit like Deliveroo, in that they can see things aren't going to be great, for the next, say, 6 to 12 months at least, and they do it now. They'll get the money. Yes, they'll take a lot of flack for it, but ultimately, maybe in a year, 2 years time, things will turn around a bit. EV sales will go up, and everything will be good.
I mean, that is, of course, a possible interpretation, absolutely, because they might think that even in the pandemic and even now, the luxury car segment is still doing relatively well, because its demographic customer target group is less impacted by the economic crises which we're seeing now.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, what you might just simply do is get this away now, and then benefit from the valuation uptick, as I said before, which it might actually have for the group as a whole. On 12.5%, I wonder how much dilution there will be and how much valuation lift you would actually get for the VW group as a whole, but nevertheless, that is a possibility. There's one other thing which will always need to be in the mind of management, and that is, what do you do with the money which you're getting from this? I mean, even if 12.5% goes away here, and if you're saying that's an 80 billion valuation, then that's about 10 billion euros in cash, which comes into the door. Now, that's a lot of money. I mean, a mid-cap company is around 5 billion, so that's enough to buy 2 mid-cap companies, suppliers. I mean, who knows what they are interested in? If they are interested in anything, I don't know. But if they're not interested in buying something, I, as an analyst, would ask the question, well, why aren't you? What are you doing with this money? Now, I'm an ex-financial analyst in the insurance industry, and I completely understand that my view of the world is slightly skewed, because in an insurance industry, you would immediately say, well, basically what you're doing here is you're just basically diluting your economic return on equity. That is less the case for a non-insurance company. In a sort of manufacturing company, in a non-financial company, you can just basically take the cash and leave it there in working capital and do something with it. It doesn't dilute necessarily your economic ROE, but the question is still valid. What do you want 10 billion euros for? What are you doing with it? Because you can't just simply leave it there. That is against good entrepreneurial best practice, so to speak, because if you just bloat your asset base, if you just bloat your balance sheet and you don't actually use that money for something, then arguably it doesn't actually create any value. So I still am wondering why they're doing this, but that's just a few ideas we were able to offer.
There we go. Right, so we're running those ideas up the flag to see who salutes. Anyway, or as my other favourite phrase that I did used to use quite often in broking to confuse people was, I will leave that in your mental microwave to defrost. There you go.
God,
right,
I'm not surprised you left the business.
I think people say, for God's sake, leave. Right. Yeah, it's like, what? Eh? Anyway,
okay.
Right, okay. Anyway, let's move on to, Liz Truss started off this week. I think it would be fair to say she probably didn't foresee what was about to happen, or certainly not everything that was about to happen. But anyway, she came in, she had to do for her for the energy, because obviously this was the most pressing thing. It seems I think she's probably surprised people on the upside. The idea, obviously, the cap is £2,500 on average for 2 years for households, which is great because it was going to go to about 3,500. And there is good news, although less good for businesses, in that this cap is going to go on for 6 months, and it sounds like there'll be they'll do a rethink at 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this sounds great from a household's perspective, because it certainly means I think it will provide some relief, and it also provides some visibility as well. The problem for businesses is that they're only getting effectively 6 months of protection, and then after that, they don't know. Now, my theory on that is that maybe the government is thinking, because this is hugely expensive, much more expensive than the furlough scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, maybe the government is thinking, well, there may be some businesses that are on the edge, and we have to limit how much we're giving out, especially if we give it out and then they still go out of business anyway. So maybe they're waiting for some business. There's a bit of natural selection to take place. Some businesses deciding to go under or just going under. And then in 6 months' time, you'll be left with the, stronger businesses, and they can maybe support those by extending the this protection or something else.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting. I think she has addressed these issues. But what do you think on that?
Well, no, I agree. I mean, first of all, I think we and others expected Liz to do something like this, because, as we said ourselves, I think last week even, when she comes in, at that time we didn't know that she was going to come in as prime minister, but it was pretty clear. So we said, when she comes in, it is very likely that on day one she's going to announce an energy package. That's not clairvoyant. That everybody knew this. I mean, this is what she had to do because it was the most intimidating crisis she would need to address, and she has done so. And I think she has done this in a very good way. I mean, I was quite critical of Liz Truss, and I still am, but I think she is the right person to implement potentially difficult policy decisions, and that is what we need right at the moment. So from that point of view, there's a tick. What she has done is also, I think, understandable. Perhaps you might say that the retail sector, people like you and me, require more protection from the government than the profit maximizing sector, the private sector businesses. I mean, I don't know, I leave it to you to decide whether that's a fair comment or not, but I think perhaps, or look at it this way, what the government has been criticized for is to say that if you go into the energy markets and you do a price cap, then what you're basically doing is you're instituting an artificial price, and that would mean that households are less incentivized to save energy than they otherwise would. Now, I think that's a bit of a weird argument, because basically, if all our energy bills were to go up to 3,500 quid, then clearly we wouldn't actually have the money anyway. And so, but nevertheless, I understand the argument there. Now, this argument, if it is valid, would work in the same way for businesses. You might say that if you were to give businesses the same amount of immunization from energy prices for 2 years, then perhaps you would actually encourage a less economical use of electricity in the business sector than you would otherwise get. So what she's basically done is she said, well, we're going to support businesses in this country for the next winter, because that's basically what it is. That's what 6 months means. And then after that, we will revisit it. what you said is probably true. The marginal companies, which are teetering on the brink currently anyway, might unfortunately go out of business. But the business sector as a whole can perhaps be expected to be able to manage the resources in a more flexible way than the retail customer. That's a tricky comment to make, because I know that it's not the case for SMEs, small and medium enterprises, but it is probably the case for bigger companies, which just have more flexibility and more levers to pull. So from that point of view, I actually think it's the right thing to do. It's not a good thing in itself, but hey, this is an existential crisis for all economies in Europe, in the free world, and we have to respond in some way, and respond she did, and I think that is, as far as it goes now, a positive policy.
I agree. I mean, I think that from a business point of view, though, businesses probably would have wanted to have 2 years or something. It gives them visibility. It means they can plan, but, you know, it's not perfect, but it's workable for the moment, certainly. So we'll see what happens there. Right then. So the next subject, really, and I thought this was very interesting. Well, obviously I did, otherwise I wouldn't mention it, would I? But is the fact that I saw there was an article in the Telegraph which said that JP Morgan is putting more resource over to London from Frankfurt. And the reason is because they're worried about potential blackouts in Germany and the resulting interruption in trading. Now, you know, obviously from having ourselves, we've worked in this industry, and we know how important it is to make sure that trading does not get interrupted at all. I mean, I don't know, Ralph, do you remember this? I mean, this was years ago, but I remember coming in on a Saturday. So all of us, a lot of people in doing our jobs in the city came in on a Saturday, which is amazing. And if you've ever been to the city on a Saturday, it literally is like a ghost town. But we came in and we were playing a game with the London Stock Exchange. So they would put through they would put through trades, and we'd have the clients would be there and they'd be there as well. And it was, I think they were upgrading or updating the trading system, and we all had to do it. And I mean, that's quite extreme, really, getting whole companies to go in on a day that they wouldn't normally go in to do that. But anyway, my point is that all these companies, it's so incredibly important to make sure you can't just go, oh, well, never mind, we'll come back tomorrow, or it's so incredibly important. So I think this is interesting because JP Morgan's deciding to do this. I'm thinking if JP Morgan's doing this, others have either thought of doing this anyway themselves, or because JP Morgan is doing it, maybe they will do it. The other thing that I wonder is, this is investment banking, but what about other things? Will there be other instances of other industries deciding to maybe use the UK or they think of the UK as having more reliable power sources? But I mean, what do you think, Ralph?
Well, I mean, I was greatly surprised to see that. I think it's an amusing thing that JP Morgan is actually doing that. But you're right. I mean, continuity is very important. You can't actually allow your trading operation to just basically blip out and you're looking at a blank screen. I mean, we once had a situation not in the company we used to work for, a different company, a different broker I worked for, and there was a situation that our phones wouldn't work properly. There was like a blip or something, and the traders were absolutely besides themselves with wrath and anger, because basically they were on the phone to execute a deal, and then the telephone blipped out, and you couldn't execute. So so yes, absolutely, it is vitally important that the electricity is working, and you don't get interruptions in trading. So perhaps I should be less bemused by this. Is actually a reasonable move to make sure that this continuity is is safeguarded. What is interesting is that behind that statement clearly is the skepticism that Germany will have blackouts because they won't be able to sustain the electricity during the winter. And so to answer your question, yes, it is possible that other companies might actually do similar things. Other companies which are as flexible. You can't repatriate
They can't do it in manufacturing,
production base, precisely.
Yeah.
You can't do that. But obviously, other investment banks can. Whatever it will be, it's going to be temporary. It's not as if the UK is all of a sudden going to be more attractive as a domicile for businesses. I mean, that's going to be temporary. But I watched the situation with interest. Just as a side comment which hasn't got anything to do with this, you mentioned that the city of London is like a ghost town on a Saturday. Well, you were a salesman. I mean, how would you know? I was there every weekend, and other analysts, and working hard. I mean, the lazy salespeople, they leave at 5.
Salespeople, of course, yeah.
Actually, it's not true. It is sort of like a little bit like a ghost.
But it is though. I mean, I remember going in and thinking, "Oh my god!" Like all the sandwich shops all closed, everything closed. And you had to bring your own stuff in because nothing would, unless if you left the building, there was just nothing there. But anyway, yes, all very exciting. So okay. Well, look, I mean, I think I'll leave it there. It's been quite a week, and I think this upcoming week promises to be also eventful, I'm sure. But anyway, thank you very much, Ralph, as always.
Thank you
for your thoughts and insights. And we'll be back next week.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
No problem at all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.